Hello, everyone. My name is Kathy Lang. I'm the Assistant Director for Research Administration at the Fielding School of Public Health. And thank you so much for attending this very important session that is coordinated by the school along with the Louise M. Darling Biomedical Library. Special thanks to Julie Kwan, the Associate Director for the library, who made arrangements to have our special speakers come here today to speak about the UC Open Access Policy. To maximize our time with the speakers, I'll keep these introductions brief. We're very fortunate to have our first speaker, Dr. Christopher Kelty, who is Associate Professor at the UCLA Institute for Society and Genetics, the Department of Information Studies, and the Department of Anthropology. And he is also the chair of the UCLA Task Force on the Open Access Policy. And then his presentation will be followed by Martin Brennan, who is the Copyright and Licensing Librarian at the UCLA Charles E. Young Research Library. And so let me start with Dr. Kelty. Thanks. You so much.
I'm just going to start here while we see if there's actually any slides. It's not terribly important if there are no slides because I can distribute them afterwards if you want to take a look at them. But I basically have sort of 6 things to tell you about the open access policy and try and give you hopefully as much time as possible to ask questions, because this is a really complicated issue. Open access, copyright law, scholarly publications, the politics of it, the economics of it, all these questions come up. And so there are obviously lots of questions that people will have, and I'll try to leave as much time to answer as many as I can. So I'm
Remember the microphone?
Oh yeah, I might need to be closer to the microphone over here so that they can transmit me through the ether to other interested parties. So I'm the immediate past chair of the committee that was responsible for designing the Academic Senate policy on open access, which was passed last summer, July 24th, 2013, by the Academic Senate. It's being rolled out, primarily being implemented by the California Digital Library and the campus libraries. And we're starting with the UCLA and UC Irvine campuses, and then assuming that nothing goes terribly wrong with it, will be extended to the other campuses as well in November. And so there's an opportunity now for you to be guinea pigs as part of this process, and to think about what you will be expected to do and what you will not be expected to do. So the policy went through 2 years of review and revision. We are probably the largest research university to have passed such a policy. And we are also one of about 200 universities at this point with similar policies of this sort. So we're not the first to do it, though we were the first to try. We failed once and then we succeeded a second time, so that's good enough for me. Right now, and this will come up because in the School of Public Health, I know there are a lot of people who are not academic senate members. Right now the policy covers academic senate members. But there's also a policy under review right now that is a presidential policy to extend it to all scholarly articles in the academic system. So that policy is under review right now. If you don't know whether or not you're a member of the Academic Senate, that's fine, because it's actually pretty arcane, as I've discovered over the last year. But for the most part, these things I'll say will apply to everyone. So one of the things that I should start with is that people often need a definition of what open access is to start with. And the kind of standard one that comes from the Budapest open access definition is the worldwide electronic distribution of peer-reviewed journal literature, completely free and unrestricted access to it by all scientists, scholars, teachers, students, and other curious minds. So the point of open access is not just to make it available for our colleagues, but also for anyone else who might want access to it, and in particular to the public, who often, especially when it's federally funded research, have paid for it in the first place, right? So the impetus behind open access policies is to make that research more available to people who wouldn't have it otherwise. Why don't they have it? Why can't they access it? Because scholarly publishers, for the most part, work on a subscription model, and they provide those subscriptions to university libraries, and only to university libraries that can afford to pay for it. So unless you're a member of a university that pays for subscriptions to this literature, you don't have access to it. So open access is intended to be a solution to that, and the open access policy is intended to do that in a very particular way. So the first thing to know about this is that this is a policy made by faculty, for faculty primarily, for authors of scholarly articles, right? And it's intended to balance 2 things. One is the public interest in access to our scholarship and to federally funded research, and the other is academic freedom. And so the policy is really designed to balance those 2 things. So open access means more readers, more citations, more interesting, serendipitous, hopefully connections because your research is available. Academic freedom means individual rights to control what happens to your publications and to understand what's happening to them and to make the decisions that matter about what will go, where your publications will go and what will happen to them. So we're trying to balance those two things with this policy. So one of the things that OA policies do generally is to change a default situation that we have. So in the normal situation, what you have are scholarly publishers who expect you to transfer your copyright to them in order to publish your articles, right? And when you do that, you can ask to make it open access, but you have to do that as an individual, and you have to do that for every publication, and you have to do it in every case, right? So an open access policy changes the default, so that now what you're doing is reserving a right collectively to do all of those things, and the publishers have to come to you and ask you not to do that, right? So it's a great collective tool that we can do because we have a collective governing body here to make this material available and accessible and to reserve those rights for ourselves. It changes the default, and that's a very important part of the story. Now, there's a strength to the policy, but there's also a weakness to the policy, and the weakness is that in order to preserve academic freedom, we allow faculty to essentially opt out of the policy, right? So for academic freedom reasons, you might say, I don't want to make this particular article open access. Or a publisher might say, we really don't want you to make this article open access. So written into the policy is the ability for you to opt out of it. Now, that's good and bad. It gives academic freedom a chance to survive and to allow you to control what happens, but it also opens up the possibility that some publishers will say to you, we won't publish it unless you opt out of this policy. So there's both a strength and a weakness there. So the second thing that you might want to know about this is that it's green, not gold, and these are terms of art in the open access world. Green means that what we're doing is essentially archiving a version of a scholarly publication that we've created. We're reserving rights for ourselves so that we can make use of that article in another context or use it in a classroom or republish it elsewhere, use diagrams from it, etc. We're reserving those rights. And that's green, it's called so-called green archiving or green open access archiving. And it's a really important aspect of what we're doing here. It's different from what is sometimes called gold open access, which is an actual business model for open access publishing, right? Because if you think about it, the business model for most publishing today, subscription-based, is publishers go to libraries and ask libraries for lots of money. Libraries give them lots of money. They publish our work, and only people who pay subscriptions get it. If you want to publish open access, that is, you want to let anybody have it, you have to have a different business model, right? And some people are engaged in pioneering these business models, and they range from things like institutional support for a journal, scholarly society support for a journal, to authors being charged to publish open access. So many of you may read or publish in, for instance, the Public Library of Science. This is an example of a gold open access publication where when you publish, you're charged a fee once your article is accepted, and then that article is open for everyone to read from thereafter. So our policy is green, not gold. What does that mean? It means that we do not, under this policy, expect anyone to pay to publish or to not pay to publish. That you have that freedom. You can choose to go either way, but you're not required under the policy. The advantage of the green policy over actually trying to change the business model, which is actually quite hard to do because there are an awful lot of players in this world, the advantage is that the green policy reserves very strong rights for you. And under this policy, you essentially reserve total rights over the article to do what you want with it in the future. The third thing you might want to know about this is that it's supported by the University of California. So it will be implemented by the California Digital Library, which is the central library that is part of a consortium of libraries on all 10 campuses. So it'll be, for instance, here the UCLA Library in cooperation with the California Digital Library. And when that happens, the California Digital Library provides a set of things. They have a website with a streamlined deposit tool, which allows you to deposit your articles very easily and simply. Oh, there it is. All right, now let's skip ahead. Okay, here you saw that part already. There's the definition, made by faculty for faculty, etc., etc., etc. And we are green, not gold, here. So UCLA and UCI are, as I said, are the pilot universities. UCSF has already been doing this. They passed their own policy in May of 2012, so we're learning from their experience as well. And that's good for folks in the School of Public Health because it's a health sciences campus. So we're learning a lot about what's going on in especially health sciences publishing. The California Digital Library will provide for you a streamlined deposit system, a prototype harvesting tool, which is a way of actually scanning the published literature and looking for UCLA authored articles, and then instead of asking you to deposit it, they send you an email saying, can we deposit it for you? So if that works, and they're quite confident that it will, then that'll ease the burden of doing this considerably, right? Because you just wait for those emails to come, and eventually, hopefully, most of your articles will be deposited that way. And also what's very important about this is that they're providing stats and data about the process, because we really don't know a lot about publishing at this point. We don't even know, for instance, the total number of publications in the UC system, for instance, and that's a very important number, because if you want to know, for instance, how many there are that are open access, you need a denominator in order to figure that out, right? So this is an important part of what we're doing here, is collecting statistics and data about the process. So the fourth thing is that there's lots of ways to do this. And there are multiple ways for you to comply with the policy that's been passed. The policy does expect you to make these deposits. So eScholarship's the official system. It's provided through the California Digital Library. As I say, it has a very streamlined deposit tool. It's much easier than any manuscript submission system you've ever used, which is good, although that's a pretty low bar, quite frankly. But it is very good, and it's a very streamlined system for allowing you to do that. eScholarship's indexed by Google, by Crossref, by other databases. You will find, if it's in there, Google Scholar will find it. If it's in there, PubMed will find it. So it's a useful place to have an archival copy of anything that you produce. It can also house supplementary materials or data. You can also deposit it in any other recognized OA repository. This is very important. How many people here are NIH funded? So all of you who are NIH funded have had some experience with PubMed Central, with PubMed. So if you are already depositing in PubMed Central, then that's going to satisfy the requirements of the policy. So for most of you who are already doing that, the policy is just sort of icing on the cake. You're already doing what we want all of our scholars to do, and so there's not anything extra for you to do, unless for some reason you want to put an archival copy somewhere else, and you're free to do that if you want. Other archives such as, yes, question here?
But there's an embargo when we do it.
There is an embargo, and actually, so the difference is that if you now, under this policy, want to, you can do it immediately instead of waiting for the embargo. So now you're covered by two policies which work in concert, but one of them has a 6-month or a 12-month embargo, and ours has no embargo. You can do it immediately if you want.
But if we do with the new system, we still have to deposit?
If you want to do it immediately, you have to put it in eScholarship for the first 6 months. That's the
But
trick
then you
there.
still have to do the unit. It doesn't satisfy NIH.
Right, you still have to do NIH. So it's easier, you know, I mean, we'd like NIH to change their embargo, but if you want it out there immediately, you can do it. It's just that you can't do it through NIH's system, right?
You say you're covered by the policy, so you don't have to satisfy the embargo, but the reality is that some journals will make us pay for the open access, and so the journals are happy to let you do anything you want as long as you pay them, and a lot
Yes.
of times we don't have any money to do that.
Right, and so you can choose to publish in an OA journal if you want, and if they ask you to pay to do that, then that satisfies the policy. The policy says nothing about whether you should choose to publish in those journals.
I understand. It's just at some point, if you could talk about the economics of it, because the
Yeah.
problem with the NIH policy is that all the financial burden of satisfying the open access policy is on the researcher, and a lot of times
Yeah.
there's not money in the grant.
And this is, as I said, with the question of green and gold policies, this is one of the sort of continual concerns in this world, is how we're going to have a sustainable scholarly publishing system, and whether or not researchers are going to be asked to pay, whether or not the NIH is going to be asked to pay, or whether the UC system, for instance, is going to be asked to pay. And those are all, I would say, open questions. The reason that it's important to understand that this is a green policy is that it's agnostic about what direction that takes. We're reserving copyright rights to do whatever we want with these articles, regardless of whether they're published in author pays or a subscription journal.
But a lot of journals won't publish them. If you tell them that you're going to put it in open access,
No, they will.
they'll say, well,
They will. And what I mentioned about the waiver is that if you deal with a journal that does not want you to publish open access, right, you have two options. You can either, if you want to stand your ground, you can say I'll publish elsewhere. And if that's not an option, you get a waiver out of the policy. And when you get a waiver out of the policy, it's simply a PDF that you attach to the agreement, and you send it to them, and they say, okay, we're all good. Usually when that happens, most of the people who are asking for waivers, and there's only about 5% of publishers who are doing that, usually what they want is not a complete waiver, but an embargo. They just want you to wait 6 months or 12 months before making it open access. There are almost no publishers that want you to not make it open access at all.
okay. Thank you.
So as I say, if you choose to publish in an OA journal, that also satisfies the policy because that's presumably an open access publication to begin with, because you pay for it to be open access. But do be careful, because there are many hybrid gold OA models where you're paying to make something open access, but you're actually not getting the same kinds of rights that you would have under this policy, for instance. And that's something that publishers are sort of playing around with, and they're playing games around what the meaning of open access is by offering these supposed opportunities to publish things open access. Under our policy, you do not need to do this. You actually already have all the rights that you need to make your work available. So the fifth thing to understand about this is that you control your publications. You can deposit your article anytime after it's accepted for publication. So the policy says by the date of publication, so anytime after that, you can deposit it. You can determine whether to make it available immediately or after an embargo period. So when you deposit, if for some reason you want to add your own embargo or a publisher is asking you to embargo it, you can choose that at the time that you deposit it. You can determine the license rights that apply. So if you put it into the eScholarship repository, you can choose whether you want very liberal license rights that will allow people to do anything with your article, copy it, modify it, still distribute it, translate it, etc., or very restrictive ones that don't allow any kind of changes but only copying and circulation of it. And so that includes things like commercial or non-commercial use or derivative works or other kinds of licenses that are available. And we use the Creative Commons licenses to do this in eScholarship. It's the most standard form of copyright licenses that allow you to make work available in this form. And you can decide which version to upload to a point. Again, if you're familiar with PubMed Central, a lot of journals will ask you to upload basically the last clean copy, the copy before it's typeset by the publisher, so after peer review and after some editing, but before it's become a typeset document. Now, this is a very murky area, and it's something that copyright law has not really yet settled on. Publishers think they have a right to everything. Authors think they have a right to everything. Some publishers are okay with things being published in their final form. Some publishers are not. The safest thing to do in this context is to upload the last clean copy, the copy before it's typeset by the publisher. So it would have all of the corrections, and it would be the post-peer reviewed version, but it would be a Microsoft Word document instead of a typeset PDF of some sort. So that's the safest thing to do. I'm not advising you to do otherwise, but you can certainly upload the typeset version if you want and see what the publisher says about it. That's what I did. But you didn't hear it from me. And there's also a database called the Sherpa Romeo database, which tells you what the publisher's policies are on this if you actually get interested enough to figure out whether your publisher is being fair about this. And then finally, there are lots of people who want to help. So this is the main California Digital Library site for UC Open Access. There's a wonderful little short video there and lots of frequently asked questions. If you didn't get what you needed from this, there's more online, etc. And there are also lots of people here at UCLA Library who want to help, including Marty, who's going to talk to you about what they're doing here, and Julie and Sharon, who's in the back. So there are lots of people here at the library who can help. So, questions?
So whenever we publish an article, we get a copyright release form from the publisher. And it seems like the steps that we have in the handout here, they don't cover that part of it. They talk about how to upload it. And the most important thing to me is to, what do I do when I get this?
Send it back to them. And the reason is
What does that mean, send it back to them?
Sign it and send it back to them. Sign it just as you would. You agree. You agree. The reason you get to do that is because the way that these policies work is that they reserve a pre-existing right. And all publishers know this because they've been put on alert by CDL and the UCLA Library that we are doing this. So if they do not agree to the pre-existing copyright that you are reserving by virtue of this policy, they have to ask you to opt out. If they don't ask you, it means by default that they're fine with it. You don't have to do anything. If you want to, if you're scrupulous about such things, there's an addendum on the UCOA info that you can attach. All it does is basically say what I just said. We have this policy and you should be aware of it.
I'm just mildly curious if that's been court tested yet.
It hasn't been court tested, but there are a couple of legal review articles, if you're interested, that have sort of explored whether or not this is a legal thing to do. And the answer is basically yes. But yeah, it hasn't gone to court.
So we have to scrutinize the copyright release to make sure they don't have that opt-out in there, because otherwise if we're just kind of randomly signing things, then there might be an
You don't
opt-out.
have to scrutinize anything.
Because they could add
It's a
something
pre-existing.
apples to
So
opt-out.
some copyright policies might try to work around this, but they have to ask you to opt out.
Right,
Yeah.
so we need to scrutinize
No,
it to
no,
make sure
They,
that.
like the editor or the journal has to write back to you and say, this isn't a complete, this is not a complete agreement until we have a waiver from you.
Right, but they
Yeah.
couldn't just add some verbiage at the
Oh,
bottom
yeah.
saying, I waive my right to this, and then you sign it without noticing it?
So they can't combine the copyright transfer and the waiver?
They could try, You can scrutinize, if anyone sees anything like that, I'd like to see it.
Okay, and also,
but-
is there a list of the publishers that you've actually notified, just to make sure that our publishers are in fact?
Yeah, actually, CDL has notified something like 500 publishers at this point of this. And since there are 200 other universities that have done this, and they've also notified 500 publishers, whatever 200 times 500 is, that's how many times these publishers have been noticed. So they know damn well what's going on, so, yeah.
So I'm listening to this with two hats.
Uh-huh.
Both as an author, I'm also an editor of
Mhm.
a journal managed through Sage, and I haven't heard anything from Sage about this. So
Yeah,
if I understand what you're saying, UC has let Sage know,
yes.
and Sage should be on alert, and anything published by anybody here should be fine with Sage unless Sage says,
And it is, unless Sage says to you,
okay.
we've decided that our new policy is that we don't like these policies, and therefore you need to get all your authors to waive or opt out. So if you're not hearing that from them, then they are essentially saying by their silence, we're okay with this policy. And people should be able to upload and make their work openly available.
Okay, yeah, because as an editor, I haven't heard anything from
Yeah.
Sage about this.
And a lot of people who are editors would not hear it unless you're an editor for, and I'll just name names here, Science, Nature, PNAS, or many Elsevier journals, but they play a lot of games because they have 2,500 journals and they can't really control this process with 2,500 journals. Any other questions right now, or should I let Marty talk for a while?
Tell me something about, when we publish papers, just put it on our website. Is there something illegal about that?
Putting it up on a website?
Yeah.
Well, not now, after we pass this policy. You're welcome.
So,
But prior to that, yeah, it was strictly speaking illegal for you to do that unless your author agreement said, we grant you back the right to put your work on your personal website, or, so if you go back and look at your agreements prior to July 24th, 2013, they will say a variety of different things. Some publications will say, we grant you the right to put it on a website, or we grant you the right to put it in an institutional repository, or we don't give you any rights. You have to ask us to do anything with it. It's a lot of variation. All publishers do this in slightly different ways. So if you go back and look at your publications and your publication agreements, some of those you may be legal when you do that. Some you may be illegal, but the publisher doesn't care, right?
Yeah.
So they're not asking people to
but
take
you're
it down.
saying effective now we can do that?
Effective now, you have the right to do it.
So things that were published previously, are they now covered by this, or
No.
only future?
Only past July 24th, 2013. Because of this complexity, it's impossible for us to retroactively, there's no legal chicanery we can engage in that would allow us to deal with that madness of different author agreements. So. All right, well, I'm happy to answer questions by email, or if you could find me on campus, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I have a lot to say about this, so if you have other questions, I'd be happy to do that. One more?
Does this have anything to do with the patent office and copyright?
Patent, totally separate thing. This is all just copyrighted materials.
You mean,
Only copyright.
What I mean, this is the university copyright or the government copyright, the patent and the copyright office?
Copyright, at UC, you own your copyrights by policy. If you're an employee, well, I shouldn't say that, because I've just learned how complicated it is. But let's say you're a faculty member at UC, by policy you own your copyrights. So you don't have to go to the university or to the government or anything. You own your copyright. That's why we can do this. Patents are a different story.
One more very quick question. If we are not UC Academic Senate faculty members now, are we covered under the policy, like to do things like putting things on our website?
Not yet, but that's what I mentioned at the outset, that there's this other policy under review, and it's very important to me that this happened because actually the Senate faculty, as I've learned, are 15,000, in the system. Everybody else who's an author, a scholar, a clinical faculty, or whatever, that's 35,000. So it totally swamps the Senate faculty, and so we need to solve that problem. From the publisher's perspective, they don't know the difference, so you're probably okay. They'll just assume you're a Senate faculty member. Maybe they'll even promote you. Yeah.
So faculty are required to add
Yeah.
all their scholarly articles from now on?
From now on, required under the policy, but the thing about the policy is that it has no mechanism for punishing you. There's nothing that can happen if you don't do it, other than hectoring emails from the California Digital Library saying, please do this, right? And there are a lot of policy things to figure out about how to do that efficiently. Staff members in departments might be involved. Faculty members might not do it all themselves. A department might decide on a system for doing it. These are all things that are kind of open for how you comply with the policy. But not complying with the policy won't have any bad effects.
But you can also just apply for the waiver, right? If you don't want to comply.
Yes, if you don't want to comply, you can apply for the waiver. So, in the end.
Okay, so hello everybody, my name is Marty Brennan. I'm the Copyright and Licensing Librarian. I'm located up in YRL, but I'm available to assist on any kinds of issues. Particularly, one of the things I do very regularly is help publishing faculty understand their author's agreement. I'll review terms for them and see if there's anything that needs to be possibly negotiated, if you can, with your editor. In fact, I'm working on one today, and you brought up the waiver bit, and it was an Elsevier journal, and they did have something deep in the agreement saying we need you to get a waiver.
Yeah, but they don't make you do it.
I
They
suppose
put it
not.
in the copyright, but they don't make you do it. So that's why I say they're playing games.
Okay. Well, yeah, Elsevier. They've
Like-
got nothing else to do. They're sitting on a giant pile of money. So anyway, I bring that up. I am available. You can reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to the folks from Biomed, Julie Kwan and Bethany, and others are available probably more readily than me. But then again, I'm just an email away, and I'll get to that email in a second. I want to show you the basic submission form, which can be found at this website. If you didn't, there's a handout on the front table. Bethany, can you give me a hand? If you could raise your hand if you don't have one of these handouts. Thanks. That's a step-by-step instructions on how to hit this website and deposit. I'm not doing this live because we can't get on the internet, so these are just static slides that I'm pointing you at. But when you get to that page, you'll see a section on the UC Open Access Policy Deposit, and you hit the drop down and select UCLA, and it'll take you to this login screen. So you just put, if you're not set up, if you're not set up on eScholarship yet, and I put this arrow in there, you can create an eScholarship account by clicking here. Pretty straightforward account setup. They don't ask you for your social security number or anything terribly private, just some basic information, and ask you to set up a username and a password. And then this is the submission form. And you'll see up at the top, there's a spot for paper article. These are tabs. And it doesn't show up very well, but that says book or chapter or non-textual. So those don't apply. The policy doesn't apply to those kinds of materials. So to submit something, you make sure you're on the paper or article tab. A lot of this information will be automatically populated by your login, particularly your name and your email and affiliations. But it's all editable. You can change it. And this is my article, The Meaning of Life. The PubMed ID, which is totally made up, and the date and stuff. There's also publication status. You can select between published or accepted and not yet published. Then you can choose disciplines. I chose life sciences. I mean, Meaning of Life should be published in life sciences. And you can also choose more than one. So you could choose medicine and health sciences and life sciences if they were both applicable. And you know, it's all explained on the right-hand side of the screen here. Anytime you do this, you'll get some information populating on the right-hand side of the screen. Then you fill in the journal information, the International Journal of Excellence, And you could put more detail in here, page numbers, ISSN, and publisher. And I'll come back to the content here where you can either browse for the file or just drag and drop, and you'll see how that looks in a later slide. But I just kind of passed through that. Then you can add keywords. You can click on this button and come over here and add whatever keywords you think are appropriate. This is something, librarians can obviously help with adding keywords, but it's not rocket science. It's information science. You could probably figure it out, but we can help if you're looking for good metadata terms. Then down here, I would like to delay public access to embargo this deposit. So if that is a choice that the publisher is imposing on you, or if you want to embargo yourself for whatever reason, that's your choice, you can set the date on which it will appear in eScholarship. I believe the citation will appear prior. If anybody else in the library can correct me on this. I believe the citation will appear right away, but the text won't appear until the embargo lifts. Okay? Does that sound right, Sharon?
That sounds
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, and this is the spot here. You can choose to specify how others may reuse this work. And this is a version of the Creative Commons license. I answered, do you want to allow translations and other derivative works? Yes. Do you want to allow commercial uses? I said no. And so it spit out this specific CC license. And if you haven't seen these little icons, get used to them. You'll start to see them all over the web. And that is getting to be a universal understanding of, you can grab it and reuse it. So if you have any questions about Creative Commons licenses, I can help with that too. Also, though, keep in mind, if you have signed over the rights to one of the publishers, you may not be able to assign a Creative Commons license in exactly the way you want. So I can consult with you on that too. But as Chris says, they're typically not doing a whole lot about it. But we're not encouraging you to violate your contracts or anything, so keep that in mind. Then you simply check the accept. You accept the policies and terms of the deposit agreement. We know you won't read them because nobody reads these things. So there's all kinds of fun stuff in that that I don't want to talk about. And then you'll get to this screen that will tell you your submission
Can you
is
go back,
complete.
please?
Sure, I sure can.
The stuff on the top right there. So
This here?
go over that, please.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I skipped right past that. So when you put in a file, you can either, and I'll skip back one screen, you can either click on this browse button and it'll pull up a dialog window so you can find it in the files on your computer like you do most typical. Or you can simply drag and drop the file into this area, as I did, and it will populate it, and it'll look like that. Okay, so, and then you have to choose whether this is your author version or it's the publisher version. Okay, right now I have it selected that it's the publisher version. And Chris was talking about that, you know what I mean? This is the version that was typeset by the publisher rather than the last version that you got back after peer review. Question?
So unless your publisher allows uploading the final published version of the article. All right, so does my publisher allow that?
That will be in your author agreement. That detail will be there. That Elsevier author agreement that I was talking about earlier specified that only the preprint version, the final manuscript before typesetting was available for this.
So, yeah, I'm getting a little bit lost here. So it doesn't sound like we ever have the right to put a PDF on our website.
Not for this policy. Right, so prior to this policy, most author agreements would not give you that right.
Subsequently, because you're saying here that we're supposed to basically put up like our Word version, which isn't the PDF, so I'm really confused now.
So nobody likes this version problem, which is that there are always multiple versions of open access articles, and that's because the publishers claim that they control the final version and are giving you rights to the version prior to that. Now, that's actually, in my reading, inconsistent with copyright law, but it's not something that we go around advising people to do because it hasn't been tested in court. There is no court decision which will tell us whether or not copyright in an article is copyright in all versions or copyright in some versions. Most lawyers will tell you that copyright in an article means copyright in all versions, but it literally hasn't been tested in court yet. So you do take some risk if you put up the publisher version and the publisher isn't okay with that. But as I said, many publishers are actually okay with that, both explicitly and implicitly. Explicitly meaning they've said in their author agreement you can do that. Implicitly meaning they don't do anything if you do it.
Except Elsevier.
Except Elsevier, yes.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
And it follows from Tom's. I've done it with Wiley after doing the PubMed, and I thought that they said that we put the author version, but we can put a PDF of the author.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
sure.
Right.
It can still be a PDF. It
Absolutely.
just isn't the publisher's.
That's right. That's right.
So,
Absolutely.
because you don't want to put an open Word document up there.
You can. You probably don't, but you can. If you actually want to allow people to make changes to it, you can do that.
So then, the other thing is, I thought that Wiley said that we had to put the link to their published version so that, well, I do think they said that.
We try to do that. I think CDL will try to do that by virtue, especially with the harvesting tool. The goal is to make sure that everything that's in a scholarship links to the canonical location, the publisher's site. It's just that the publisher's not going to, so this, the point is to make this openly available. If you don't want to make it openly available, if it's too much work, then you can opt out of the policy.
So is that going to, okay, let's suppose I do a PDF of my Word version. When the harvesting happens, is that going to replace what I put up with, so there are going to be 2 versions?
No, it won't. It won't. If there's something already in there, then they won't even bother you. If you've uploaded it already, why would they bother you?
Well, bother, I'm sorry to belabor this, but bother, I mean, what I'd like people to be able to see is the real article that has the real page numbers on it. And if I put up something that is my version, there's no real page numbers, there's no this or there's no that.
You're not alone.
And yeah, but then when you come harvesting, you say, oh, he's already put it up, I'm not going to put the real version there.
Well, they might. The harvester might ask you for the author's version also, depending on whether or not we can actually. It's a very
I
complicated
realize
thing
we're
to
on the
figure out.
frontiers now, yes. Okay.
So, but if you've put it up in your scholarship, there's not actually any reason for them to come back to you. They may send you an email and say you've put up your author version and you have the right to put up the publisher version. Or if the publisher says you have to take it down, they'll come back to you and say you've put up the publisher version and you shouldn't have done that. But that's about the extent of it.
But to clarify, you could go in later and switch out your author version to the published version.
Absolutely.
Under this policy, you have a right to do that.
Absolutely.
The publisher can't come back to you and say, you gotta take it down.
Absolutely.
Except it's exclusive. It's not true for the NIH policy. We can't, when we submit the preprint version, we don't have the right to put up the publisher's version.
No, he was asking whether you can change it later.
If the publisher's okay with
Yeah,
this.
yeah, that's
Okay, but not if the publisher's not okay with it.
No, but we have the right here under this system to publish it regardless of what, to upload it regardless of what the publisher says. If that's
To
if I'm
upload the
understanding.
preprint version, not the publisher's
No, the
version.
published version also, if I'm understanding.
No, not you. That's the thing that's murky.
Right.
That's the thing that's murky.
Right, and that's the type of thing that will be in your author's agreement. They will specify you can share this kind of version, but not that kind of version. Okay, and so again, talk to me when you have an author's agreement in front of you, and I can help you understand any kind of limits and see if you wanted to negotiate with your editor, not just on issues pertinent to the open access policy, but any particular rights that you want to retain as a scholar to reuse your work, to share it with your students, to put it up on your website if you so choose. You can negotiate those rights, particularly if you've been publishing a while, and I bet some of you have. So, junior faculty have a much harder time negotiating with publishers. They will just jam the agreement down your throat. But if you are more experienced, they might be more willing in order to get your work in their journal. No guarantees, though. I don't guarantee success on this at all. But you don't get what you want if you don't ask. So keep that in mind. Also here, right beneath the upload spot is a place to simply put a link to the version of the article already up in open access. If it's already up in PubMed Central, you can simply put the URL here and not upload anything into eScholarship or any other acceptable open access depositories. Okay, and again, you get to this screen that says your submission is complete. I didn't make any error screens, so you know what that looks like. So if you get a different kind of screen and you're confused, reach out to the UCLA Library. The address is oa@library.ucla.edu. That's monitored by people in my department with scholar communication and licensing. You can also reach out directly to health science or biomed library people.
Where do you do the waiver? Isn't there a link to a waiver form?
That's a good question.
There is a waiver. It's on the same website, and it's the same as
the waiver generator.
The waiver generator. It's basically you just put in the title and the journal.
So it's simple.
Yeah, it's very simple, and then it gives you a PDF that's signed by people.
Yeah, it's somewhere on this page.
There it says generate a waiver, it's under help. Right above where you're signing, under sign, yeah.
Generate a waiver or embargo combination. Yeah. Sorry. So, any questions? Yes.
Sorry. If your publisher has requested one, well, again, does that include, like, your publisher says, sure, you can do open access, but you got to pay me $5,000? Is that, and I say, I don't have $5,000.
Yeah, don't pay $5,000.
Is that, okay, but is that a situation that would fit under if your publisher has requested one?
No.
So if...
Only if it's an open access journal, right? If it's a hybrid one that says you can have open access if you want it for $5,000.
Right, that's the situation.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't pay that.
But if you choose to publish
an
an
open access journal, that's their business model. That's the only way they make money.
I get that. No, I'm talking about
chosen to
hybrid
publish
journals.
there.
But
Yeah.
the hybrid journal says you are not allowed to do this unless you pay us $5,000.
You are allowed to do it. That's why we passed this policy. That's why we did this. Trust me. I mean, yeah, you got my email.
Not the typeset, you're talking about the author's version, not the publisher's version.
You know what? You didn't hear this from me again, but I put the typeset version up. We need to push on these boundaries, right? The publishers are playing with this because they don't want other versions of their article out there in the open because they work on a subscription model. If you want your work openly available in the form you want it available, you should, and you're willing to take the risk, you should do it. But they do try and control it by saying that they have rights over the typeset publisher's version, right? And we do not know, legally speaking, whether that's true. So for risk takers in the room.
So what do you do? So in the hybrid situation?
Yeah.
I think for you risk takers in the room, our experience for the few occasions with publishers Chris mentioned that prefer you not to put the final published, what will happen is they will notify either the university or you. So you're not going to get the go to jail card. Risk takers.
Yeah.
What will happen is you'll get a notice, or through your intermediary, which will be CDL, or it'll be your home campus at UCLA, we'll get a notice and we will sort it out. So Chris is really right about that, and for some of you that I've heard that feel really strongly about wanting the final published and be willing to take that risk, put it up. There's no other thing that's going to happen, and we'll sort it out together.
Very few people go to jail over that.
On a more philosophical issue, though, if the subscription model stops working because everybody's putting the final versions or the typeset versions up anyway, then all the journals will switch to the open access business model, and then we're all going to have to come up with the $5,000. Plus, it'll seem a lot like paying to get publications, and then it'll become very difficult to evaluate people for promotions because whoever is willing to pay lots of money and has the money is going to be able to publish.
That's one version of the future. There are others. There are other versions of the future.
Happier versions.
But it's very much about speculating about what will happen in the future. And it's fun to do, but there are lots of different things that could happen. Yeah, and you should be worried about it. We do have a problem in scholarly publishing, which is that we cannot afford all the publications that we produce.
Right.
We simply cannot afford all the publications that we're producing. And there are reasons why we produce that many publications, because to get tenure, or to get promotions or merit reviews, we have to do it, because there's publishers creating new journals by the bushel load so that they can meet this demand. We just can't afford it, because the only people paying for it are libraries right now. So the way to think about this is, you should be scared about it, because right now the only people paying for it are libraries, and the publishers know that the only other people with money are researchers. So they're looking at your research money. So it is not an accident that this is happening. And it's not caused by open access. Go ahead, sorry. I apologize.
So I have a concern kind of thinking about the lay public, in the sense of there are all these unfinished papers essentially appearing, and if you're a scholar, you understand that these are, they're not quite done, and there might be a few changes and important details and things like that. But if you're a layperson and you're like, oh, hey, it's open access. Oh, look, there's this thing, and it becomes truth, and the media picks it up, and Upworthy makes a video or something. I worry a lot about that, because you see, I can imagine an overzealous person saying, oh, I got to conditionally accept, I'll upload that, and then a bunch of changes happen, and it's not the final version, and people forget, and next thing you know, it ends up in the ether, and then people pick it up, and then you run into lots of problems. I don't know if minimally you have a flag saying that these are not fully done papers, and these are just pre-production papers. If you don't have that, I really believe you need to have that as a minimum. But I think there needs to be a broader conversation about public access to papers that are not fully done.
Are you talking about the difference between the final author's version and the
yeah.
typeset version?
Yeah, I mean, the paper that's typeset, that's put out there, there's a certain set of assumptions that we believe that these papers have been fully vetted and they've been corrected. But in those pre-production, there's errors in the tables, and people might have phrases that are awkward and might be misconstrued. I think there's a lot of potential worry there.
So this is important to hear, because I think people have different experiences of what the difference is between the author's final version and the typeset version. In my discipline, it's like maybe a single typo or something. It's just very little difference between those. It may be different in other disciplines. And if you're the kind of person, or in the discipline where the difference between that author's final version, post-peer review, post-editing, post-corrections, and the typeset version is substantial, you probably should default to uploading the final typeset version. But I think that we need actually better information about what that looks like across the disciplines, and I agree. I think, for CDL and for the library, saying this is the publisher's version, you should look at the canonical published version, is something that they want to do. The reality in the public is that they don't have access to that, right? So they're only going to have access to the one that you make openly available, right? And
at a minimum, the public needs a warning saying that this is not the final version.
Yeah.
I know that Chris has to leave.
run,
Yeah, thank you so much. But sure he'll be available at the results.
Yeah, I'm happy to continue the philosophical discussion.
Oh,
But that is,
this is?
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure, this is yours. Oh, sorry. More questions? Yes.
Will the harvesting tool contact every author or just the lead author?
Will the harvesting tool contact the...
Every author.
I believe so, yes.
Because they might answer differently.
I think the harvesting tool is looking initially to contact every UC author, to the extent that those affiliations are clear to them. So there's in many cases, there's multiple authors. I think the feeds that we're giving them, my understanding, is first to send a feed about who the authors are. So that's the identity of the UCLA UC authors that are part of the policy. And then the other stuff that is starting to go into the harvester is all the different kind of publisher, like where do you publish? So you need those two things in order to make the harvester effective. But I'm not sure, to answer your question, that they would contact authors that they think are outside of the UC. But as to UC authors, the policy applies to all of them. And so
Right.
my sense is the harvester is designed to work for the whole system, even though there's 3 pilot campuses. So ultimately, I think all the UC authors will be contacted.
Right, and to keep in mind, just in simple copyright terms, not necessarily how the harvester will work, but if the 4 of you are co-authors on an article, any one of you can choose to copy it and distribute it as an owner of copyright without asking the others. I don't know if you know that, but
I think that actually raises a concern. So let's say Kate and I co-author a paper and we upload different versions. Is there any kind of cross-checking or any kind of flag?
No, I don't think so.
So
I
that,
mean, maybe ultimately there is, but here's the thing that Marty's comment about so much authorship goes to, since most people don't know about it. That's a construction of copyright, of contract law in some way more than copyright law. It's just really important for all of you that are by discipline doing multiple authors to sort these issues before you ultimately finish your work, because you don't want your fifth author to be really out of sync with you. And that's just the way it has always been. It has always been the case, even well before the policy, before digital, before the internet. If one of the 10th authors wants to put it somewhere, they have every right to do that. If all the rest of you don't want to disclose at that point or don't want it to be published, that 10th author has every right of the first author, unless you make an agreement, at least an agreement of some type. But ideally about copyright, your agreement should be in writing. So I encourage folks that where it really matters about IP, and you're doing multiple authors or multiple makers, if it's a digital project, to really talk about that up front, or you're absolutely right. You will not be in sync, and the law will support the fact that you don't need to be in sync.
I'm actually talking about the scenario where, let's say Kate uploads a version, I upload, say, a newer version, and they're not cross-referenced. Somebody else from the public says, oh, there's this article on something, and somebody else in the public, and so one person's looking at my version, another person's looking at her version. I can see potential for confusion, especially when the versions are not final.
right. I think there will be efforts within eScholarship to make sure there's no we call it deduplication, deduping the interface or the database.
I think
So-
within eSchol, that's true, but in the world of the
Yeah,
internet
in the
and
broader
the World
world.
Wide Web, more
Yeah.
broadly, that may not be the
Yeah.
case. And I think for those folks in the room that may be familiar with the physics preprint archive called Archive, there are multiple versions of papers in that, and this question of versioning is really important. I mean, you're bringing up a really important issue, and I think we just really need to talk about it more and work on it so that it will become less of a concern. But right now, it is an issue out there.
Other questions?
I think we're
Just one more question. As an author who uploads this, do I get to see who downloads and who look at my article?
Yeah, you should be able to see. Well, who specifically?
Yeah.
No, but I think you will be able to see statistics of how many times it's been accessed. But no, you can't track like exactly who. And I'm glad you
So
can't.
it's not as advanced. Like research LinkedIn, right? They can tell you like which university and even who look at your stuff and download your stuff.
That's not the functionality that I'm aware of.
But eSchool will provide .edu, whether they're in the country. You will see some info, but not
Yeah.
as to the individual identity. But they will be getting statistics about recent access.
So we actually have to conclude with the session as another class is coming in. Thank you so much for coming.
If you have further questions, I'll be out in the hallway. I'll be happy to.
And I also just want to mention quickly Bethany Myers here, who is going to be our representative to help support our Fielding School of Public Health faculty, staff, and students with any library needs.
Yes.
And research needs. Thank you.